Okay, well, welcome everyone to this session on accelerating climate adaptation through championing beans in Africa. This is with Beans is How and hosted by the UGIH Pavilion, the Global Innovation Hub for UNFCCC. So thank you to UNFCCC for giving us the opportunity to bring stakeholders together both in the room and online. We have a live stream, and so welcome if you're watching online. We've got a great group of speakers with us today, and we want to have a bit of discussion and debate once we've set the scene. And the idea is to look across production and consumption and research and data. We're going to hear about some exciting examples and some local contexts. This time last year at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we launched the Beans is How campaign. And it's been so exciting to see the momentum and progress that we've had over the last year. COP28 is the next milestone in achieving the goal of doubling global bean consumption. Overall global bean intake is not where it needs to be. At about 21 grams per day per capita globally in 2016. Although intake is higher in some countries, such as Burundi and Sub-Saharan Africa, at about 80 grams per day, we need to see how we can move this up. We see huge potential for beans on the African continent, but in order to create long-term behavior change, we need a multi-pronged effort. And so we need to bring in different actors to work on this. And so this is a conversation with some key stakeholders to really put a spotlight on how beans can be a smart solution to the world's climate and nutrition problems. So before I provide some more framing on the Beans is How campaign and the focus areas we've defined and bring in our panel, I'm looking forward to some opening remarks from a special guest. First, I'd like to hand over to Agnes Kalibata, the President of AGRA, to highlight the importance of beans addressing climate challenges in Africa. What are the challenges, Agnes, and in this current context that we're in? Please join us and give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for those introductory remarks and for the work you're doing, Paul. You and your team are doing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? You can hear me now? Okay. I was also thanking you, Paul, for the work that you're doing to advance beans. I come from a country where we eat beans 3 times a day. So if you know Rwanda, you probably know that we have the highest diversity of beans, the last time I checked. So we are supporting the world in that sense, but we also are supporting by making sure that we provide the market for beans. But the challenge is huge, it remains huge, even in my own country, Rwanda. Exactly, thank you. So I was saying that the challenge remains huge. 50% of the people in the countries we work with have a prevalence of anemia, and this is extremely challenging, especially for women in childbearing stage. It's also extremely challenging for children that are growing up with malnutrition. 45% of maternal anemia still exists on the African continent. But there's a lot of work that is happening to advance, to really overcome this problem. And I just wanted to mention a few efforts that are underway, that we are part of, and that we would like to see scale. First of all, I want to recognize that last year in Rwanda, we launched the Beans is How Challenge with the help of the presidents that were there, led by President Kagame, and I wanted to appreciate that effort. At AGRA, we've seen major opportunities. There are biofortified beans that exist, that the CGIR and so many other people have worked on to make sure that this work becomes available. At country level, there are policies that can quickly scale this to ensure that every farmer has an opportunity to produce iron-fortified beans so that we can deal with the challenge of malnutrition. At AGRA, we are also working on early generation seed to ensure that we have enough material to pass on to companies that are producing seed. And we want to make sure that this effort takes the bean opportunity further and to more countries. But we've also been experimenting with different production systems, recognizing that beans are part of how we strengthen soil systems. We are doing beans in strip farming in Nigeria and Burkina Faso, and we are seeing yields improving in those in that work that we are doing. This is not work we've innovated. This is based on work done by GIZ in these countries, and we are building on that work and taking it further. We are doing work with IKEA in Kenya, where regenerative agriculture is beginning to ensure that farmers that would usually have no bean crop are actually getting a bean crop. So the opportunity in our midst to continue pushing production systems is growing. But the biggest opportunity is the market, which we are also part of. We are now supporting work on school feeding and making beans, fortified maize, available to school feeding. So working with the governments to ensure that schools have access to beans that are fortified through the work we are doing with Rockefeller Foundation and Harvest Plus is something that we are extremely proud of. We are reaching about 1.2 million kids with the fortified beans and hopefully fortified maize. But here is the thing. In a short period of time, we can reach 10 million kids if we start working on procurement systems that allow beans to become, that allow countries to actually come up with innovative ways of purchasing from farmers. This was done in Brazil. Brazil is probably the best example of how you build a partnership with farming communities and school feeding systems. So there are many things we could do to learn from what Brazil did there. And this, again, is the biggest opportunity to turn and ensure that we advance the beans market because it's good for nutrition, but it's also good for the soils that we are trying to build. So we are excited that in our midst, we have the Pulses, what's the word? The Pulses Institute. The Global Pulse? The Global Pulse Confederation. And here is my challenge to you. How much beans do you want? And from which country? So that we can make sure that those beans become available. So thank you again, Paul, for putting this together. And you can count on us to advance these areas I talked about, the production systems, support to the research through early generation seed systems, the policies work to advance beans, and the procurement part that is happening to ensure that school feeding gets to advance better nutrition. So thank you again.
Thank you, Agnes. You are one of our bean champions and been so supportive in your leadership of the Food System Summit as the special envoy and just really challenging us to come up with these food system approaches which look at a kind of approach that connects all people, planet, prosperity in different ways. And I think beans create a way for doing that. The idea came from a conversation that you convened at the UN Food System Summit. And so really appreciate your continued leadership and also the practical work that's already happening on the ground. And I think we're excited to see how we can continue to see more resources come and more collaboration and more connection. So thank you for making this time and for using your voice during such a busy day here at COP28. So before we move into the panel, I'm going to invite Javier Mateo Vega, who is the Senior Director of Partnerships at CGIAR, to come. Javier, we know there's an urgent need to transform our food system, taking into account climate challenges. What are the opportunities with beans and how can research play a role in moving this forward?
Thank you so much, Paul. And I'm sorry that Agnes has left us because I was going to report that I also come from a country that consumes beans 3 times a day in Costa Rica. It is a fundamental part of our diet and of our culture, and we prepare it primarily in a dish known as gallo pinto. And if you haven't had it, I truly invite you to come to Costa Rica and have it. It's fantastic. So thanks for the question, Paul, and good morning to all. I'm truly delighted to be here with you to be part of the How is the Beans campaign. Beans is How campaign. So let me start by covering the points that we well know, and it's the fact that we're facing a host of challenges, including biodiversity loss, increasing hunger with 600 million people projected to be undernourished by 2030, and the difficulties facing our food systems, such as feeding a growing population, which is going to reach about 8.5 billion people by 2030 and increase further to 9.7 billion people by 2050. So these challenges affect geographies in different ways, but they do have something all in common, which these challenges are fueled primarily by climate change. So climate change is affecting our food, land, and water systems, leading to the largest food crisis in modern history and compromising our ability to achieve zero hunger and many of the sustainable development goals. Beans. Beans can help us achieve this transformation that we require. They're sustainable, affordable, and cost-effective, healthy food for people of all incomes. This is a critical point. Daily consumption of beans, especially of varieties rich in iron and zinc, can help increase iron levels, improving physical and cognitive performance. They're climate-smart crops that reduce greenhouse gases, preserve water, and improve soil fertility and resilience to climate change. An increase in bean consumption will boost the incomes for small-scale farmers, many who are likely to experience poverty and hunger. And trends show that iron-rich beans are well on track to account for up to 40% of overall bean production in East and Central Africa over the next couple of years. This is a huge lift. So this is thanks also to a great extent to the work of organizations such as the Alliance and CGIAR, and through what you will hear more about through my colleague JC Rubio in a little bit about the Pan-Africa Beans Research Alliance, PABRA, who have worked to breed these varieties hand in hand with farmers and make available to 30 million households in 32 African countries. So how does research play into this? Well, PABRA, which was created in 1996, is a multi-stakeholder network on beans research to improve the productivity, use, and commercialization of beans for rural and urban populations, has been critical in this endeavor. So the idea behind PABRA, behind the network, was to scale up production and consumption in Africa to improve food security, income, and health of smallholder farmers and urban dwellers across Africa. Moreover, the increasing competitiveness in the bean market would provide consumers with better products and boost economic growth in the member countries of the network. And I'm sorry, JC, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder here. I will stop soon bragging about the wonderful things that PABRA does, but I'll stop very soon. So PABRA's success show how research and innovation are crucial to shift towards climate-friendly food systems. And beyond helping us to create more nutrition and resilient varieties, research and innovation can help us identify the right leverage and enabling environments needed to make sure that these varieties are actually adopted by farmers. CGIAR plays a fundamental role in providing decision makers and the public with the evidence needed to make informed decisions. And we believe that our research and innovation would not be as effective, of course, without strong partnerships. This is a critical component of the work that we do, and we're very aware of this. So our new vision of partnerships take a horizontal approach based on co-identification of challenges, co-learning, and co-creation of solutions and sharing of risks and rewards. 2030 is just around the corner, and most global development goals will not be met unless we massively increase our efforts to fight climate change and hunger. Beans are simple, yet powerful resources to bring us back on track to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for having us, Paul. It's delighted to be here.
Thank you. And really appreciate just the connections that you've made there between how science is part of the solution, how research can really drive into practical application and action. And I think as we talk a little bit further about PABRA and the work that's done there, I think it's really important because sometimes people think science stays in the laboratory. But I know what CGIAR is doing is really making those linkages and connections and really getting it into the hands of farmers. And I think as we're continuing to adapt, this is really critical. So thank you so much and really appreciate it. Just before we jump to the conversation, I've got a couple of, just 3 slides I want to show really quickly just on the campaign. Just Beans is How is this campaign to double the consumption of beans, peas and lentils by 2028. It's about making beans visible, and there we go. They appeared where I am. They're about making beans visible, desirable, and necessary. And we all know that, but we've got to get other people to know that. And the idea is that we've pulled together a coalition. There's almost 100 members, many represented here. We have a Science Innovation Advisory Council, a board, champions, many who have spoken today. We've developed a theory of change. Here we go. And the theory of change has really about how do we engage these stakeholders and move that forward. How do we drive innovative communications and marketing? And so there's a lot around how we can move forward in that regard. And then coordinate advocacy for strong policy. And so looking at that, and we'll touch on a few of those points, but then also enable new research, research around consumption habits and behavior change as well. And so if you want to find out about the theory of change, we can, if you go to beansishow.org or .com, you will find the link and you can have a read. What we're really looking at is how we build a model to scale. And this is something really about food system transformation, which I mentioned earlier. It's about how do we learn and then replicate. So it's learn and replicate, learn and replicate. And the idea is to start and learn we've got a priority action around the UK, Kenya, India, and USA. We've got Beans on the Menu challenge in key global cities, and that's starting to build an influencer campaign, really looking at how you lean in. Things like school meals are key areas to lean into, to learn, then replicate. So say, how do we get that going? And so the theory of change is really built around that and really about moving that forward. But we're going to jump into our conversation, and we're going to have a bit more of a conversation around, particularly in Africa, but how do we really accelerate climate adaptation through championing beans? So we're going to unpack these issues. I'm joined by, and I'm just going to give a short introduction because I'm hoping you will talk about your work a little bit as you introduce yourself as well. And so I want to get straight into it, but I'm just going to, please, I'll just read out who we have here. So we've got Vijay Inga, from the board president from Global Pulse Confederation, Jean-Claude Rubiago, the CGR Global Bean Program Leader and PABRA Director, and also current Africa Food Prize winner. We've got Sylvia Pastorino, the Research Consortium for School Meals, and Roy Steiner, the Vice President for the Food Initiative, Rockefeller Foundation. So please give them a quick welcome. Great to have you guys with us. So I'm going to rapid fire give you a question each, and then we're going to get into a bit of discussion. So I'm going to start with you, Vijay. So the Global Pulse Confederation represents all the different segments in the pulse industry, the value chain from growers, researchers, logistics, suppliers, traders, exporters, and importers, to government bodies, multilateral institutions, organizations, processors, canners, and consumers. So a big community involved in the pulse industry. So can you just tell me a little bit about the role the industry can play in increasing bean consumption and the broader pulse family? And what regional trends and potential do you see in Africa that could help us reach this goal of doubling consumption?
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. And Paul, thanks for inviting GPC to be part of this event. GPC has been in existence since 1961. We're a non-profit body based out of the US in Dubai, and we represent the whole ecosystem of the Pulse community. And over the years, we've been involved in the UN Year of the Pulses, which was 2016. Every year, we celebrate the International Pulse Day. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Every year, we celebrate the International Pulse Day on February 10 at the FAO headquarters in Rome, and it's celebrated in over 30 different countries, all with a view to making sure that pulses are really in the eyes and the ears of the consumer. Having said all of this, over the last few years, pulse production and consumption is around 41 million tons a year. And honestly, for us as GPC and for the consumer at large, it's important to have some new production coming. And for us, countries like Africa and some of the countries in South America are the ones that we see being able to scale up to meet the need. There is increasing awareness of pulses being a great source of protein. They fit 3 points that all of us are really concerned about. One is equality, because pulses generally tends to be a small holder farm, and usually it's something that gets into really the small farmers. Second is the sustainability, because pulses generally gives nitrogen to the soil. The third thing which both Agnes and Horatio mentioned was that pulses also is a great source of protein and is nutritious as well. So all these 3 aspects are something that pulses really meets. And for us as a global body, we have been involved, a number of our members are involved in Africa in the primary areas, their procurement. They play a role in procurement. Some of them invest in transformation at the farm level or in the procurement level. So all of them, they are playing a role. Having said that, nothing is enough, and this is something which Agnes threw a challenge at us, and it's something that we want to concentrate on as well. So what we also do is, every year we have a conference. This year we are doing something in India, which is the world's biggest producer and consumer of pulses. We want to stress that free and fair trade globally is something that's important for countries to be part of. And as India realizes that they are on the threshold of increasing consumption, they will need to support producers around the world. And I think Africa is where they are already looking at. There's lots of pulses being grown in countries like Tanzania, Malawi, and Mozambique, which are finding their way to the Indian market. The Indian government is also playing a role in it. And I think we as a industry body can really lend ourselves to it. We are planning a conference in Ethiopia, and probably as Agnes gave us a challenge to do something in Rwanda and Zambia, that's something which we will look at in the course of the next year. Thanks.
Thank you, Vijay. It's obvious the industry plays a huge role to bring together the connections, I guess, across the supply chain and bring together that focus. I want to turn to you, JC, and hear more about how you see beans and their potential. As the winner of the 2023 Africa Food Prize and co-winner of the 2019 Al Sumat, we know Barbara has a lot to say about beans and their potential. What's the role of bean breeding in addressing climate impacts in human health? In addition to the success story of high iron beans in Kenya and other parts, what other examples can you share?
Right. Yeah. Are you able to get me? Oh.
You want to
good.
bring it closer?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, maybe let me use this one. Hello?
That doesn't work.
Okay, yeah, I think that's better. Right, yeah. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for giving us this opportunity to share. Yes, Barbara is the winner of 2023 African Food Prize because of the work involved in really getting the beans which beat climate change, or which can address some aspect of climate change. Maybe I just start with a small background and story. Is that, yes, there are 2 key major value chain actors when we consider. One is the consumer. Of course, it comes through the trade, definitely. But then you also need to incentivize the farmer to keep on producing. If the farmer is not incentivized, then the consumer will not get product. If also the consumer does not indicate what they want, then the farmer does not produce. So the two, what we're able to do under PABRA is to look at how these two can combine. One, for the farmer, one incentive is adequate production. It's productivity. And one of the key challenges is the climate change. So what we're able to do is that climate change, there was a prediction by our teams, forecast, yes, climate change will be 2050, less rainfall in some areas, excessive rain in some areas. That means change of temperature, change of rainfall, change of agroecological factors, which determine the production of beans. So we went ahead and look at now, build resistance, because it brings the pest and disease. There's weather changes, bring disease and disease. So we have built, that's a background for any material, must have. So we bring disease, pest, and tolerant material so that farmers don't even use chemicals to spray, so that reduce their cost rather than use. That's one way to address both cost and also climate. Second is looking on, because some areas the rainfall will be limited. So we have been able to bring the duration, growth period, from almost 90 and 100 to 65 days. So we have a variety which are short duration, climate smart. In 2 months, you can harvest. You can imagine one seed you plant to get 60, maybe 20 to 30 seeds. So that means you can get 30 times what you planted in 60, 65 days. That's a good achievement. But also we have variety climbing beans, which can tolerate heavy rainfall in certain area. So we are looking on all this, which to beat the climate challenges. Of course, we still have a long way, because we thought that mainly it would be drought. Now we have excessive rains. Or you have 2 weeks of heavy rainfall, and then you have 2 weeks of dry spell. So how do we get resilient material, which are yield stability? That's now what we're working on. But there are several success stories, like Kenya, as you said, Nyota, high iron. We also go to the consumer trade. It's not just a climate resilient alone. It's a consumer trade, because I said the consumer is very important. And how is now working on a consumer trade? We have started working on high iron and zinc for the last closer to 15 years now. We got a variety with the iron threshold, which is higher by 20% the normal beans, the ones in the market. That's great. We have released them across more than 80 countries now. They are being used, like what we talked in Kenya, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Tanzania, in Uganda. We also have beans with a different market type, different colors, because they're interested in yellow, red. We have that as well. That's another trade. We've started the most important, which I think will also make available the high iron and zinc, is the cooking time. So we have started breeding for short cooking time. You can use other method to cook, definitely to reduce, like a pressure cooker and others. But majority of consumers you have in Africa, they don't have these pressure cookers. They don't have a gas. So they are using firewood. So we are now, in the next 2 years, we'll have varieties, nurseries for short cooking time by 30%. So if you used to do 2 hours, will be less than that, will be less than 30% time. So this will avail nutrients faster, will be better. At the same time, cut energy use, cut firewood, which is a climate issue too, and water use, definitely. Waste of time for people who go to the kitchen, particularly women. So we are really tackling in different ways in terms of genetic innovation. We also don't have non-genetic innovation. Maybe I stop there, because with the beans I won't stop. Yeah.
No, I love your passion, JC. And if you ever get a chance to have a meal with JC and talk over a plate of beans, there's so many great practical stories from different parts of the ground. And I think this level of action and connection is so critical. And you know, even his background, he grew up with, his family grew beans and just the whole story. And so thank you, JC. I'm going to bring you in, Sylvia. In terms of just thinking through, at the moment, school meals in Africa is a key way in which beans, I suppose, show up on the plate. And you're working with the research consortium, School Health and Nutrition. So the research consortium's evidence-based white paper on school meals and food systems is a research initiative of the School Meals Coalition, which also came out of the UN Food Systems Summit and was incredibly powerful and engaged with and continuing to grow. Okay. But yes, so there's a clear factor on the need for menu changes that promote the health of people and planet. And so what role do beans play here? How can we get more beans on school menus?
Yeah, I think you already gave a good introduction of the white paper. But just to reiterate, the white paper has been developed at the request of the country's coalition as a way to implement planet-friendly school meals. So it's really a policy paper which is backed by evidence. So we identified a set of key policies that are the one with the broadest impact on the planet, planetary and population health. And changing menus is one of the key policy areas. Specifically changing menus to make them more climate resilient, nutrient rich, and also predominantly plant-based and whole food. So clearly beans and lentils and legumes are a key part of this type of diet, which would ensure that diets are within planetary boundaries, but also they're one of the best elements to ensure short and long-term health outcomes, because we need to remember that this is a time when children at school, they form dietary habits, preferences. It's actually one of the key time to introduce food that are good for the health and the planet, because they will learn to like it. They will going to be part of their dietary habits. So beans are one key part. The other reason is because they are very high in nutrition, in micronutrients, which are usually quite lacking in children's diet. One is fiber, and the others are micronutrients we talked about already, like iron, magnesium, folate. So there are different micronutrients that are very rich, and there is different variety particularly rich. The other reason is because they're obviously very environmentally friendly, and there are now many studies that show that legumes are up to 20 times less, they have up to 20 times less environmental footprint compared to some animal protein food, especially beef, and they consume this across the whole board, like greenhouse gas emission, water and land. And they also obviously fix nitrogen. That is a major win-win across the board. So how do we get more beans into school? So obviously this can be a challenge because, okay, we know they are the win-win, but how do we get there? So the first policy we identified is to include beans, legumes, and all these foods that are planetary friendly into school food guidelines. So some countries don't even have school food guidelines. So the first thing is to create one, and then to put the actual foods that we want, not just nutrients, put the food there and make them part of the weekly menu. This will create demand for the food. The second part is the procurement. The second part is that the procurement. So having procurement rules is key in linking the demand from the school with the production from the farmers. So obviously we talk about the examples like in Brazil where they have like a 30% compulsory procurement from small local farmers. Having these kind of linkages ensure that the production stay local and increase local development also for women and smallholder farmers. So this is that's also why these are a key way to introduce food system transformation to school meals. And lastly, we need to remember that school meals are one of the broadest, largest food system, publicly funding food system in the world. So this is a great way for government to dictate really the rules rather than rather than the market. Like, is a way for government to really put their stamp on and make a change. One last thing, if I had time, is like to make them to try to make policies that are also acceptable for the community, for children, and for the cooks. And that one key one is to ensure that they are that they have like technology, cooking technology is obviously one is to produce shorten cooking time with the variety, but also like in increment technology that reduce cooking time, like pressure cooker, electric pressure cooker, which also have enormous benefit for the environment and health. And the other one is increase acceptability at the local level by having beans in more like acceptable in recipes and ensuring that they're part of the communities really. And so it's a more like a global, as like a community effort really.
No, absolutely. And I think that multi-approach or that kind of different approach looking across is really key. And I think the recipes, is always key, flavor and taste. But cooking time, I mean, I think as we think about this, there are all these different impacts. And I know cooking time can be a really big issue, especially when there's a lack of technology. There can be breeding to reduce cooking time, but there can also be technology interventions around that. Even simple things like soaking and can really increase effectiveness of kind of that reduction. Thank you. As we bring you in, Roy, so we know how important, when we think about school meals as well, public procurement is. It determines what people eat, and so policy impacts that. And particularly in public institutions and increasingly in school and importantly in schools. Can you tell us about some of the work needed on this? And also, I know that you're very committed to the School Meals Coalition through the Rockefeller Foundation as a way of really driving change around food systems. So can you tell us a little bit about how can beans be increased there, and what do you see as a vision for really driving forward using that public procurement and also the school meals?
Sure. Well, when I think of beans, I think this is a revolutionary, amazing technology that's hiding in plain sight. We spent all this money doing venture capital to develop things, and actually beans create so much value that we haven't really been exploiting. And in fact, I think, we've been doing a lot of work around artificial intelligence, but this is a type of biological intelligence. So we have to go from AI to BI. Okay, so that's my contribution for today. We're gonna have biological intelligence, or bean intelligence, to address our climate problems. I mean, because it's not just as my panelists have said. Not only does it create like 50 kilograms of nitrogen in a season, sometimes up to, when you combine it with a grain, it becomes a perfect protein. It's exactly what children need to eat. And so, we really do need to push both the supply and demand. And I think there's been a challenge in the past, and if we're going to double it, I think institutional procurement is absolutely critical. And so we're pretty excited about how do you, as Sylvia mentioned, how do you build it into the guidelines, these school feeding guidelines, so that kids have it with every meal, because it's going to dramatically improve the quality of those meals. So I am particularly excited about a couple of things. One is, we're with the School Meal Coalition, we want to expand school meals to 100 million plus more kids. Well, there's a tremendous opportunity to kind of shape the diets of a large portion of the population. In Kenya, for example, they've committed to go from 1.5 million to 10 million kids, universal school feeding. That's 20% of the population. We can with one policy instrument potentially reach 20% of the and that creates a whole demand for the kind of beans Jean and BJ were talking about. But we need the beans, so we need to get those things working together, and I'm looking forward to kind of making that a real transformation. The other thing is, I think many people don't understand, at least in Africa, that school cooking takes unbelievable amounts of wood, like piles of wood. In fact, one study shows 50 acres of forest can be deforested in a single year by one large school. So just moving to, these are sparse forests. This is not dense forest, I think. By moving from wood to e-cooking is, I think, a really important shift. And as we expand, we could do that and bring solar energy. We can have this incredible climate and biodiversity impact. And I'm a great admirer of pressure cookers, by the way. They do two things. One is they cut down time by 50 to 75%, and that opens up a lot of time for people in schools to do other things. But there are some anti-nutrient qualities in beans. They're carbohydrate cages that surround iron and other minerals, and when you pressure cook it, it bursts it, and it's much more bioavailable, and it reduces flatulence, which everybody is concerned about when they eat beans. So less farting, more bioavailability, shorter cooking time. E-cooking is the solution to a lot of that. So obviously, we also need to breed for shorter cooking time. I think that is a big challenge in many parts of the world because people don't want to spend so much time cooking, and convenience is absolutely critical. So with that.
Yeah, no, you raised some really, really good points. I know when I was in Tanzania, we were in a very rural community with a Maasai community, and they were cooking beans. And it took, I think lunch came at, very, very, very late in the day. And there was a school there, and they were cooking all day on wood from dry beans. And the chefs that came said, "Why didn't you soak the beans?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" And so the next day they rang and they said, "Please soak the beans. Can we do it?" Lunch was ready by 11, and the day before it was 4. And so it's just simple things, even just without using a pressure cooker, where you can get it down to really. And so there's these things that we need to be kind of promoting as policies, actions that we need to be getting out. And I think this is something that we need to not only be thinking about the varieties, the way we're growing those beans, and I think breeding that way, but also how do we educate, how do we think about these and build them also into policies and I suppose playbooks, I guess, to really help drive. And some of it's very simple innovation, very simple. So just in terms of action, I just want to see, look, we're wanting to drive action. I think for me, coming to meetings like this, it's all good to talk, to learn from one another, but it's also really important to do things. And so, for us, we're working on policy guidelines around how to get more beans into schools, around how we do that, working with research partners on this, and how do we drive that forward. We're looking at some country action work. We're going to be doing a pilot in Kenya to try and join this up between some of the players, from the producers to the schools, and working with partners. Reflections from you. What's some actions that you're going to be taking in the coming year in regards to really just helping get people eating more beans? Who wants to go first? Anyone can jump in, please.
Is that, this is something which was mentioned earlier, that how when we grew up, beans was a preferred meal, and it was a preferred choice. What's happened, particularly in countries in Asia, is that as we grew economically, the beans as a component of your dinner plate reduced. And for us, the big conundrum and the big action plan is how to make pulses and beans the preferred meal of choice. That's the signaling. That's something which Beans is I was working on, and all of us can work on. And one of the issues that we always felt is when we started talking about pulses, then we had some pushback from other industries because they thought, hey, one is at the expense of the other. So the message that we are sending out is, everyone, when you look at your grocery cart, make sure that 20% of your grocery cart is pulses and beans of one form or the other. So at least we all make a contribution of some sort. The second thing that we are pushing, and it's something that a lot of our members are involved in Africa, but we are trying to send the message that we need more production. We obviously need more consumption in Africa as well, because the minute you export everything, then you're dependent on markets other than your own. And you're subject to the vagaries of the market. For example, in earlier years, African producers found that India was a consistent supplier, a consistent buyer of pulses from Africa. The year that India had a super crop, they stopped buying, and the African producer sat on supplies which were 2 years old without a market, and a marginal farmer cannot afford it. So essentially, the message that we have to drive is that, hey, this has to be one of the choices and preferred choices globally, and B, consumption in Africa also needs to come to the table. And these are the two messagings that we are doing among our members. And I'm also a business person. I'm also in the pulse industry, so that's something which we look at as well.
I'll jump in. So, one of the big shifts and discussions here at COP in the last few years in agriculture is the importance of moving to a more regenerative agricultural system, right? So the current conventional system we have with these large monocrops, industrial, heavy chemical use, that's just not sustainable. We've got to change that. A regenerative system is one that is inevitably much more diverse and reduces inputs significantly. We have to reduce fossil fuel derived inputs. Beans is an incredible technology to do that. So we, as all these companies and corporates say, oh, we want to become regenerative, we should be asking, okay, so how are you increasing beans as part of the rotation? Beans need to be part of almost every rotation in the world if possible, because of the fact that they fix nitrogen, they contribute to a much more diverse and ecologically robust and resilient system. So one of the things we're hoping for is as more and more people claim to be regenerative, we bring in the importance of beans as part of that regenerative transition.
Maybe we need a bean measure or a bean target in the regenerative transition or something. I like that.
Yes, more BI, more biological intelligence. Yeah.
I like this BI. It's taking on. Well, I can see lots of nods in the audience. Sylvia.
Yeah, and I was wanted to say that at the launch of the white paper, actually climate sustainable school meals were endorsed by many countries, including Kenya, Rwanda, and then subsequently Sierra Leone, and they are very committed to make this happen. So I think on the School Me Coalition, there is I think there is a lot of interest in this work, and I think there is a lot of interest from the country to make this happen. And from the research part, we want to really push what are the key messages and try to help country identify what are the most country-specific implementation policy, because we have to remember that they can be completely blank for everybody. So each country we're going to have the specific issue, and I think this is where having evidence-based policy, having like a impact studies, so tools that can help it to project what is the best, for example, crop and food to decrease environmental impact and cost, as well as increase nutrition. I think they really help them to make this happen in school, in the real world.
JC.
Yeah, maybe just pick from all these colleagues. I think we need to work on different levels. One, we need to work on productivity, which Roy was talking about. The regenerative agriculture become a policy, and we have a variety with the short duration, which fits in between two crop seasons of cereals or intercrop. So I think that's something we have capacity to move forward. If we make it a policy engagement, I think that's going to be very useful. I'm also looking on supporting small medium enterprise to develop products which the consumer are looking for. We have urban consumer who is very choosy. I'm thinking that we really need to support innovation in addition to biological intelligence, and also market intelligence, to look at how do we get the urban consumer, what type of beans products are they looking for. Pre-cooked beans is one we have been working a couple of years with the private sector, like in Rwanda now, in Uganda, where they supply the schools pre-cooked beans. Schools don't have to cook anymore, because kids, when they eat beans which are not cooked, they hate beans in their life. But when they are pre-cooked, then they have a good meal, and they grow with that habit. So that's something we need to push industry to come with the new products, which are nutritious but very convenient as well. And we need to keep the beans affordable. That's why the productivity is still very important, so that the people who depend on beans as the sole or the major source of proteins and micronutrients, we don't deplete what they have, but we build on that. I think there's some of the, we also need to work with a coalition. I like the school meal, where you bring private sector, you bring public sector, you bring ministries of education and other people involved, as well as researchers, to look at the product, look at how does the process, how does cooking affect the availability of these nutrients. I think that's something which we need to put more resource into it, to investigate further. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you, JC. And I definitely think, that approach of bringing those stakeholders together is definitely part of how we want to see Beans is How going forward. So it's really, the coalition is now starting to form at country level, and really looking for leadership at country level from global organizations, but also local organizations, to really start to translate learnings and start to take that forward. Because I think as we look at each country, there's slightly different situations on the policy level, but also on the behavioral or the marketing level in terms of how do you drive this influence. And so that's something that's definitely coming forward. I think we're running out of time. This conversation could go on for a long time, but I know people have a busy day with Food Day. So I really do want to appreciate everyone making the time and joining us today. The coalition is open, and we do want everyone to join in this conversation. We want you to all become beanies, and we would love you to go to Beans is How and check it out, and also just really think about when you're making choices about how you can bring more beans into your own diet. Because I think actions, when we think about climate change, food is where it becomes personal. And I think it becomes personal through the choices we make, through the farmers we support, through the products we eat. And I think we can actually really drive action through this food agenda on climate impacts. And so for me, it's really exciting to see that really starting to sort of showcase and come up in things like the School Meals Coalition, in industry, in the regenerative agriculture space, in the research agenda. And I really encourage us to continue on. I'm looking forward to next year having more conversations about innovations around this and how we can scale further. So please thank our guests for making the time to be with us, and we appreciate you all joining.